Bad movie directors aren't exactly rare in Hollywood. Unfortunately, there are more bad ones than there are good ones, which ironically keeps the industry in the constant monetary motion. The good ones at least let us know that there are some good movies out there that can be made by really talented and creative people, while others only make it just to make the big bucks, or even just a quick buck. But then there's one director that ignited what will be an incredibly promising career to being the absolute worst of the worst, to being okay. That's where M. Night Shyamalan comes in. A filmmaker who started his career making a great lineup of films, then took a complete faceplant onto the solid concrete, and then finally picked himself back up again. Shyamalan's film career is somewhat of an emotional roller coaster for both the filmmaker and for moviegoers that watch his films. It leaves us with a bit of happiness, also a bit of confusion, sometimes anger, and then back to, at least that was somewhat enjoyable. And now I want to take this opportunity to acknowledge how far he's come in his career. And the best way to do that is to break down his films from where he began with The Sixth Sense and with where he's at now. So let's begin. Starting off what would be a promising career for Shyamalan would be The Sixth Sense. The Sixth Sense was only the second film he ever put out before the first film that he ever made, which was called Praying with Anger, that came out in 1992. Then 7 years later with The Sixth Sense. This was a box office goldmine, bringing great performances from left and right from Bruce Willis, Haley Joel Osment, and Toni Collette. And while his performance still stand out, they wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for Shyamalan's directing and storytelling that brought this movie in the best light that it could possibly be in. And it definitely deserves it. With its gripping horrific nature and its wonderful storytelling, The Sixth Sense became a classic among all horror enthusiasts that enjoy horror movies to this day. And it only goes uphill from there with Shyamalan with the next film he makes, which is Unbreakable. Starring Bruce Willis once again alongside Samuel L. Jackson. While not as highly celebrated as The Sixth Sense, it's still a great film to watch. Still making the big bucks that the previous film made, still manages to be a great classic that people enjoy even to this day. Signs would be the next film that Shyamalan makes that basically put him on the map. If The Sixth Sense didn't do it for him and Unbreakable was just so-so, Signs would be the game changer for his career. And it only made him the superstar that he was meant to be. Then things started to become a bit questionable when it came to the next film that he makes, which was The Village. This film had highly mixed reviews when its first release, from it being a compelling story to probably one of the worst things that people have ever seen. It left people very unsure of what Shyamalan's career or what his filmmaking style could actually dish out, and it gave people a big question mark above their heads. Me personally, I thought it was not as good as the other three films, but at the very most, it wasn't exactly him being lazy or completely unhinged in terms of his filmmaking style. But regardless, with these four films being as highly profitable as they are, making almost $500 million in the box office for each film, Shyamalan's career will just only have high promise and would only expect to blossom from time thereon. And then Lady in the Water came out. So by this point, people would question whether or not Shyamalan was seen as a mastermind in terms of filmmaking, or just seen as the biggest meme of all time. And Lady in the Water didn't really help his case. With this confusing storytelling and high level of really unnecessary narcissism that comes with it, Lady in the Water became the biggest Shyamalan meme pretty much before memes even existed. And like The Village, it was basically a mixed reception when it came to its overall reviews on both critics and audiences. We weren't really sure whether or not we can even see ourselves liking this film. It left people questioning what the hell Shyamalan was doing at that point. But then it all came clear when The Happening came out. The Happening was basically a film that left people not only confused, but basically see it as a complete and utter joke. And I can see why. That this movie wasn't really meant to be a joke, and then the performances from the actors would basically leave you puzzled and laughing your ass off the whole time.
I hear you whispering. Planning on stealing something?
No, ma'am, we're not.
Plan on murdering me in my sleep?
What? No!
That alone should tell you that you made a mistake paying for those tickets. But while Lady in the Water and The Happening were basically seen as a joke, The Last Airbender would be seen as a genuine hate crime to people who love cinema and the people who love the series Avatar: The Last Airbender. This was regarded as one of the most hated films to ever exist in the history of mankind, and it definitely deserves to be. I personally didn't really hate it as much because I knew it was gonna suck, and that's why I didn't really see it until after I made a review about it like 2 years later. But beyond my own opinion, everyone basically went into this film thinking it was going to be fantastic, and they got one of the worst films of all time. So much to the point where they actually literally sent death threats to M. Night Shyamalan when he's making one of the worst films he could have ever made in his entire career. And it basically nearly ruined him. And while this movie made a lot of money, as well as the other two films, it was basically getting the crucifixion from every single moviegoer to ever have the misfortune of paying for the ticket to watch this film. It was a really bad look for Shyamalan at that point. If The Last Airbender wasn't the one movie that made people hate Shyamalan's filmmaking, then After Earth would be the nail in the coffin for a potential end in his career. This was regarded as one of the worst sci-fi movies to ever exist, performed by two, I would say, pretty good actors, who are father and son. While there is nepotism in that, there's at least promise for them both to actually be potentially good at what they do in terms of acting, but unfortunately, this film doesn't really cut it for them. Whether it be Shyamalan's fault or even Will Smith's fault for trying to promote this film as hard as he did, the film doesn't fare well with the sloppy storytelling and its overall sloppy execution as a film. After Earth would seemingly be pretty much the end for Shyamalan at this point. Things didn't seem to get any better, as his career was seemingly spiraling downhill. But then only a couple years later he came out with the movie The Visit, and it seems to actually fare much better than his earlier bad films. This was actually a pretty decent one. A decent film from this guy? Who would have thought, right? But I'm serious. This movie is actually pretty decent. Not as good as The Sixth Sense or Unbreakable, but in comparison to the 4 films that he did after those films, this is definitely a step up from what he did before. And it's really great to see him redeem himself. And things seemed to get better from there when he released Split, which wasn't exactly a game changer from his earlier films, but it still managed to be a pretty decent flick for not just me, but for a lot of other people, and actually put him back on the map again in the positive way. While directing, his actors seemed to be a little bit more Shyamalan-esque, like they were acting all stilted and a bit weird Mark Wahlberg-esque sort of performances. Like, they still managed to get a good performance out of James McAvoy and other actors. So at the very most, you can tell that he's trying to break out of that cycle that he was in for so long. And then Shyamalan decided to go backwards again with the movie Glass. This is where he was trying to make a quote-unquote cinematic universe of quote-unquote superheroes in the previous film that he did that was Unbreakable, which had to do with a lot of superhero themes or comic book themes in that movie, in response to the popularity of comic book movies that were rising at that time and are even becoming popular now. Which, in hindsight, makes sense in terms of getting to sell more tickets, but as a film, it's pretty mediocre. Maybe not as bad as, say, The Last Airbender or The Happening or After Earth, but it's still pretty bad, and a lot of people didn't seem to gravitate towards it as much as Shyamalan could have hoped. Then he came out with another movie, Old, which was favorable and entertaining enough. Didn't really exactly hold as to being a classic, but it at least showed that Shyamalan was learning from his mistakes and decided, well, we'll just try a different idea altogether. And while this movie isn't exactly like great necessarily, it is rather mixed. It does show that he's at least trying to do something new. I can respect him for that much. And finally, we reach to where his current career lies with Knock at the Cabin. Again, Shyamalan just being his old, original, unique self. You know, being his old Shyamalan self. And it fares okay. Not really like the most fantastic, but it fares okay. Considering the mess hall that he went through with his middle ground in terms of his career, this was something that he can just proudly put on his resume and say, I did that. And it fares okay, to say the least. For someone to get so much negative criticism towards him, anyone would easily just throw in the towel and say, I give up, I'm done with this, I can't take another form of criticism anymore, and just walk out unseen and just disappear from the public. But Shyamalan, he didn't do any of that. He took the criticism and learned from it and decided, I'm going to keep going with my career and I'm going to make the best of it. And honestly, I can't help but admire that. For so many people that would easily give up on this, he just kept going and going as if it meant the world to him. It's like he loves this job so much that he wants to keep going with his own passion of filmmaking without anything getting in the way. And that's just something that I or anyone else can be inspired by. It doesn't matter how much criticism you take, you can still keep going and make the thing that you want to make. And I feel like that's important to understand, not just with filmmaking, but just with career life in general. You're going to get criticism and you're going to get flack from a lot of people. But does that mean that you should give up on your dreams? Hell no. You keep going and you actually try to make it work, no matter how hard it gets. And that's what Shyamalan did. And to this day, he's still going with the movie Trap. And honestly, I can't wait to see what he has to offer next. So Shyamalan, keep being you, buddy. We love you all the same. Even if we don't always love your movies, we love you all the same.